Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, master of shadow and phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, misshaping what he touched, twisting what he ruled, the lord of werewolves. His dominion was torment. He took Minas Tirith by assault, for a dark cloud of fear fell upon those that defended it, and Orodreth was driven out and fled to Nargothrond.
Alright guys, welcome back to Keep On Tolkien. This is Joel N.
And this is Danny J.
We are glad you decided to tune in for episode 4 today, our first subject that is not The Hobbit.
Yay!
And it is going to be on something else I think everyone else knows and loves, or someone else, Sauron.
Sauron. Yeah, Sauron, so he's a guy he goes by many names, some of which you're about to hear right now. Thu, the Necromancer, Servant of Morgoth, Myron, Anatar, Artano, Gorthaur the Cruel, the Enemy, the Dark Power, the Great Eye.
The Necromancer, the Lord of the Rings, the Sorcerer, the Black Hand, the Nameless Enemy, Sauron, Thu, Sauron the Great, and Sauron the Deceiver. Just to name a few. Actually, that's all the ones we could find.
So, just a brief summary of what you may already know about Sauron, or you may not, but this is a starting point. So he is, first and foremost, the bad guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The bad guy through most of the stories I think most people are familiar with.
Just almost always the bad guy.
Yeah, he's
almost
around from the beginning, but he's obviously more prevalent in Third Age stuff, but he is the main source of evil through a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people know already that he is the mastermind of the Rings of Power scheme, which we'll obviously get into. He is actually the namesake of the trilogy. As Joel read earlier, he is the Lord of the Rings, indeed. And for the Third Age, he's mostly disembodied. He doesn't really have a physical form all that often. He's just more of a force of nature, really, than a person.
Not necessarily a character that you're going to see walking up and having dialogue with somebody. He's just kind of a background force of evil. So we're going to take you all the way back to the beginning and see where the hell this guy even came from and some of the shit he did along the way. Because he has been around for a long time. He's been around since literally the very beginning of existence itself.
Of time, indeed. Yeah. So that's where we're going to start off, is with the story of creation. Obviously, we're not going to get super detailed, but how it starts out is there's one god, and his name is Eru, whom the elves call Iluvatar. And he's just by himself originally, and he's getting pretty lonely out there in the void. So what does he do, Joel? What does he do?
So Iluvatar, lonely in the void, creates the Ainur, who are basically like angelic beings. There's a couple different classes amongst them, but overall they're known as the Ainur, and he creates them in the timeless halls. And all they do all day is they practice and sing the music of Iluvatar. Iluvatar would start a musical theme, and the rest of the Ainur would join in song. Yeah,
a lot of singing. They love their singing. So Iluvatar, he taught them how to sing, and that was like, their shit. That was like all they did.
It's like teaching them to speak.
Right, yeah, it's their form of speak. And so basically what the song that they ended up singing, it had three main themes to it. And each of them expressed a different mode of creation, basically.
So the song itself was the song of creation. It wasn't just some music. It was actually creation happening through music. The song itself had to do with what happens throughout the world, and that becomes physically manifested into the world that is known as Arda. Granted, this hasn't happened quite yet, but that's what the song is building up to. Not that any of the Ainur knew that quite yet.
So yeah, as they're singing along. There's one particular Ainur whom we know as Melkor, who's a force that we will tackle in our very next episode. So stay tuned for that. But Melkor introduces discord into the song, and through that, introduces the concept of evil to everything that is, essentially.
Yeah, so he's your stereotypical Lucifer type character in terms of your mythologies and whatnot. So he's the one of the Ainur who decided he wanted to throw his own bit into Iluvatar's song and throw it off.
Because he's the smartest too. That was yeah.
He was the smartest and most powerful among them. I think.
Most powerful, yeah. And he also Iluvatar, when he created the Ainur, he basically split up parts of his mind into into different Ainur, and Melkor got a little bit of everything. So he had knowledge of a vast many things, and he definitely uses that.
Definitely uses that to his advantage. So when the world becomes physically manifested into Arda, the important information here is that when the world comes to be, Iluvatar sends down a total of 15 in all Valar. Now, the Valar, all they are is the Ainur, just physically manifested and put down on Earth. But they're kind of a hierarchy among the Ainur.
Right, they're the more powerful.
On the planet, you get a bunch of Ainur that come down, and there's some that are Valar, and there's some that are Maiar, lower than them. Nonetheless, Melkor is one of these.
He's Valar. So yeah, as they come down, they're basically categorized into hierarchies, and the more powerful of which are the Valar, and there's a small handful of them, but there are countless Maiar, who are kind of their helper spirits, I guess you could say. And and so you'll run into a lot of Maiar throughout Tolkien. Just to name a few that we run into eventually, Balrogs are Maiar. Saruman is Maiar. Gandalf is Maiar. And of course, the guy who we're all talking about today, Sauron is Maiar.
He is one of the Maiar, one of the lesser Ainur that come down to the planet. And his name
was Myron. And Myron, it translates to the Admirable. He was a Maya of Aule, who is they're kind of all the Maiar are kind of assigned to Valar, and they help them in their labors. And he was one of Aule's, and
Aule being the Valar of creation and smithing, and working with the physical world.
Yeah, Father Earth, essentially.
Father Earth, essentially. And so Sauron being under Aule, or I should say, Myron being under Aule.
Right, Myron at this point. Yeah.
He's still Myron.
Still Myron.
He is given the ability. Well, I shouldn't say the ability. He's known for being extremely obsessed with order and structure. He's really good with the industry.
Efficiency.
He's very into efficiency. Very against waste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he obviously he kind of obsesses about these things, and which will lead him down the rabbit hole of evil, essentially.
And you think back to what you already know about him in the Third Age, you can see where these qualities really come into play in his evil life. But at this point, he's still a pretty swell guy. It wasn't until he started spending time with Melkor on the Earth that things started to go awry. So Sauron was very much seeking power at a certain point, because he had such a desire for order.
Right. He thought he would be the one to fix it all. He would be the one to make Arda great again, I think is what he was driving at.
Make Arda great again.
Make Arda great again.
Man, I wonder how that worked out.
Yeah.
Sauron.
Yeah. I wish there was some sort of present day analogy that we could maybe use for that.
I don't know.
Anyway, moving on. Yeah. So Myron is at this point he is starting to talk to Melkor, and Melkor is essentially openly rebelled against the Valar, and he set up shop in Middle Earth. And at this point, Sauron, Myron was a spy for Melkor for a little bit, feeding information from the Valar. But as soon as Melkor set up shop in Middle Earth, he went with him. He essentially pieced out and went to join him.
Yeah, he saw that his needs, as he saw it, were not being met, at least quickly enough, through the Valar that he was currently teamed up with. And he saw Melkor going out and doing all of his own stuff and doing whatever the hell he wanted to do, and realized he could fulfill his desires through Melkor more efficiently and quicker than he could with the Valar. So he just decided, for efficiency's sake, to just go team up with that guy. And
yeah, and that's kind of always how it's been. It's not like it's always been a relationship of advantage. Like it's not
an honorary friendship of any kind.
I wouldn't say it's a friendship.
It's a business relationship.
Yeah, it's a business relationship because Sauron has his own desires, and he's going to use Melkor, the force of nature that is Melkor, to achieve his goals, no matter what, essentially.
So eventually, when Melkor sets up shop over in Middle Earth, he makes a couple strongholds, one of which is known as Angband, which he, for a while, gives to Sauron to be the captain of. Until later turn of events, Melkor has to take up shop there as well, so he kind of takes over. But
yeah, Melkor's off when Sauron's running the Angband. Melkor's off corrupting the elves, right?
Corrupting men at that point.
Oh, corrupting men.
That's when he's corrupting men.
That's when he's off corrupting men.
Yeah, he's got some big fish to fry, and he's just really trying to fuck up the entire world. So he's busy, so he lets Sauron hold up the fort for a while. But Sauron is always, in his top-ranking officers after that. He's the leader of his armies. As you heard from the excerpt in the beginning, he actually at one point kind of has his own island. And we're going to get to that.
Yeah. So, Sauron, what he does is he takes a place called Minas Tirith, which is a Noldor city. It's overseen by Orodreth, who is the brother of Finrod Felagund. And so Sauron marches in with not only a whole horde of hideous Halloween-like creatures, werewolves, vampires, the Babadook, everything. And he marches in, and he also has this, like, everything that surrounds Sauron, he has this aura of fear and just despair that follows him. Like, it creates, like, defeatism in his enemies. So, like, essentially he took it without a fight because they were so afraid that they just kind of took up and left.
Aside from seeing werewolves and vampires storming their
pretty little castle. Yeah, so they leave. Can't blame them. I probably would have done the same.
Yeah. Eventually, it becomes known as the Island of Werewolves.
Right.
It's a pretty spooky place. There's a lot of those Halloween creatures hanging out there.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit more context for that excerpt, since it was a short one, we're going to go ahead and read it again, so you kind of have some context now.
This is really where we start seeing Sauron do evil things. This is the first
real evil shit.
This is the first truly evil thing that we've really seen Sauron do is taking over this island.
And this is like really the first time we hear from him since he was Myron and like left. So like this is how Sauron shows up again in the story. Here we go. Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, master of shadow and phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, misshaping what he touched, twisted what he ruled, lord of werewolves. His dominion was torment. He took Minas Tirith by assault, for a dark cloud of fear fell upon those who defended it, and Orodreth was driven out and fled to Nargothrond. Yeah, so that's the story of them taking over the island.
And now we see Myron as Sauron.
As Sauron.
Truly.
which means which he was named by the Noldor, which means the abhorred.
The abhorred.
The abhorred, which is basically like kind of a mockery of his. The admirable, which is what Myron meant.
I really think that Gothour the Cruel got kind of shafted in his list of names.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pretty badass one.
Right, and that's the one that the Sindar call him.
Yeah. Sindar being the main language spoken in Beleriand, as you may know from listening to episode 2 of our podcast.
Right, we talked about it.
We talked about it. You think that his name would be Gothour, not Sauron.
Right.
To most
Why
people.
would they use the Quenya word? Which is like, so basically, essentially, if you said the name Sauron,
you'd get killed.
It was illegal. Yeah, it was illegal. So that we never really understood that. That's one of those mysteries.
Let's just refer to him as Gothour.
From now on, I will never, ever refer to him as Sauron again. One of the main events that happens in the First Age, in which Tolkien considered one of the great, 3 great tales of the Elder Days, is the story of Beren and Luthien, which you might know from there being a new book out this year called Beren and Luthien, which is fantastic. You should definitely read it, and we're definitely going to talk about it later on. But Sauron plays heavily as one of the villains in the story of Beren and Luthien. Okay, so the tale of Beren and Luthien kind of let's focus on Beren, the namesake. He's the son of Barahir, who's the captain of men. And Sauron, in the beginning of the tale, finds out through torture and deceit where Barahir is, and he murders him. Kills them all.
We may recognize the name Barahir from something that we know in the Third Age. The Ring of Barahir.
The Ring of Barahir.
That Aragorn wears does go all the way back to this Barahir. That is his ring.
That is his ring, yeah.
It is one of the oldest artifacts in Middle-earth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's actually Felagund's ring, Finrod's ring. We'll definitely get to that story at another point. But no, that Barahir is... So by way of the Ring of Barahir, that also means, obviously, that Aragorn is a descendant of Beren. Distant. Very distant. But this is the same lineage that we're dealing with. So yeah, Beren's father is murdered by Sauron.
And an entire band of his men.
Yeah, all of his bannermen and like probably family members too. They're all dead. He kills them all. And then so at this point, Beren goes down to a place called Doriath. He finds his way in there. You're not supposed to find your way into Doriath, but Beren does it, and he meets up with Luthien. And through a series of events that we're not going to get super into because they don't have to do with Sauron, Beren eventually has some adventures that he is captured by Sauron, and he's held in the dungeons along with our good friend Finrod Felagund, who's one of the great characters in the Silmarillion.
One of the great kings of the Noldor.
Yeah, super awesome. They say he's like the fairest of all the elves. So like, he's a very attractive man. He's Gladriel's brother. So.
But at a certain point during Beren and Luthien, they are captured, Barahir and Felagund, in the dungeons of what was Tol Sirion, this island that is called now the Island of Werewolves that Sauron took over. And he does some terrible shit in there. He has their entire group in the dungeons in the dark, and they sit in there as werewolves come out of the dark and pick them off one by one. He, at this point, is trying to find out who they are, because Sauron doesn't know who they are, through the magic of Felagund, disguising them.
Because Felagund, we also mentioned briefly this in, what was it, episode 2? The face-changing magic?
Mm-hmm.
That was episode 2. Yeah, so this is that face-changing magic that Thranduil and the Hobbit probably didn't have the know-how to do, but Felagund definitely did. And Felagund turned them into the likeness of orcs, and they were sneaking in, basically. And Sauron saw right through it and captured them. And they have like a huge, like a battle of sorcery, which Tolkien describes as like songs. Like they sing at each other for a while. And Sauron eventually wins the sing-song battle, which... but at the same time, Felagund makes it so like Joel said, they don't know who they are. So their intentions are hidden.
So he's more or less torturing them as he's killing them, just having these werewolves pick them off one by one out of the dark at random points. It's pretty terrifying. So eventually it gets down to just Beren and Finrod. And when the wolf finally comes for Beren, there's a really dramatic fight between Finrod and the werewolf, and it ends up killing them both.
Yeah, well, wounds Finrod, and he dies in Baron's arms, essentially.
And this is all in Sauron's captivity. He's making all this happen. It's some terrible shit. Now, at the same time, there's another character in the story, Luthien, that comes to save them. And she brings with her one of my favorite characters.
Oh, the greatest.
And no, it's not Círdan. That would
not Círdan.
That would have been pretty awesome.
Yeah, that'd be fucking awesome if Círdan showed up in this story. But this is one of the few fucking stories that Círdan does not show up in.
But instead she brings Huan, the Hound of Valinor.
The Hound of Valinor, who originally belonged to Caligorm, who was one of the sons of Feanor, of the Noldor.
He's a dick.
He's a dick. I hate Caligorm. He's a huge asshole.
But Huan is pretty great.
But Huan is great. Yeah, he was given to him as a pup by Orome, the hunter god, the hunter Valar. And yeah, he came over from Valinor with them.
And so Luthien and Huan are here to save the day and save Beren and friends. Little do they know that everyone else is dead
but
at
Beren
this point.
Is dead, yeah.
But nonetheless, they come to save him, and Luthien more or less stands outside and draws out all of Sauron's werewolves, and then Huan comes out of the dark and kills those werewolves one by one.
Just one by one.
Until eventually it comes down to Huan and Sauron. Now, Sauron, being a pretty smart guy, thinks of a known prophecy about Huan the Hound at the time. There's a known prophecy about Huan that he will be killed by only the greatest wolf. And so Sauron gets all cocky and says, all right, that'll be me. And he changes into...
Using the powers of the Maiar.
Using the powers of the Maiar, Sauron changes himself into a werewolf, and so ensues the battle of Huan and Wolf Sauron. Yeah, like cue fucking heavy metal guitars.
Yeah, and it doesn't, as you may or may not imagine, it does not go in the favor of Sauron. And Huan eventually has him pinned down. Sauron's panicking. He's taking forms of all different creatures, and they got him pinned down. And they're like, "Hey, give us the counter spell to take down all the enchantments on the fortress, and we won't steal your skin."
Huan's basically like, I won't break your neck.
Yeah, he's got him down where he wants him, and he's like, we're gonna like destroy your physical form here if you don't tell us what's going on. And Sauron obviously takes that deal because he's not a dummy, and he takes that deal. They let him. He turns into a bat creature, and
like a bat vampire creature, and he just flies off while there's like blood dripping from him, and it drips onto the trees. It's pretty gross. But
he just fucks off like this.
And that's the last we really hear of him until the end of the First Age. At that point, people speculate he probably just didn't turn up again because, like, after really failing Melkor that hard.
You wouldn't want to see that guy.
No, he was going to get reprimanded pretty hard. So
yeah.
he kind of peaced out for the rest of the First Age. But we do see him again, and that is at the end of the First Age. And we're talking about a lot of things have happened, and we're all the way to the War of Wrath.
The big one.
This is hands down the largest battle to ever happen, period, in the world of Arda. This is the largest battle. It literally changes the geological layout of Middle-earth. So the Valar eventually come and just deal with Melkor through a lot of strife on the elves. Eventually, the Valar decide to intervene, and they come with the hosts of Valinor. That includes Maiar. That includes the elves that stayed in Valinor. There were a lot of...
Probably the fucking Ents And probably the fucking
Ents.
eagles.
The eagles, I'm
because
sure.
as well, and we're going to talk about this obviously in a later episode, but Yavanna, the nature goddess, created the Ents to be her shepherds of the forest, and Manwë, the god of the sky, created the eagles to watch over everything. So I'm assuming that they were part of the hosts.
Yeah, of the
Like,
hosts
so
of the Valar.
We're
I'm
talking
sure.
everybody showed up.
And on the bad side, this is when winged dragons were first introduced. So this
Right.
battle was
So it's a lot
on
more even of a
another level.
battle. Yeah.
oh my god, it
Yeah.
would have been insane. But nonetheless, Sauron is just on the sidelines
Yeah,
while this is
not
going
fighting
on.
in this battle.
And as the battle basically starts tipping towards the way of the Valar, he actually turns up.
Yeah,
And,
he turns up, says hello to Eonwë, who is the herald of Manwë. He's chief of the Maiar, so they obviously know each other.
He's kind of leading. Yeah, he's kind of leading the battle at this point. So Sauron seeks him out.
And he begs forgiveness, and he says Eonwë tells him that he has to return to Valinor to be judged, and Sauron refuses, and that's pretty much.
He's like, I repent, but not
that
much.
Yeah. So and then he just takes off. We don't see him for a while. But so this is gonna segue into a new segment that me and Joel are doing. What we call Minnesota Tolkien radio drama. Which is we're gonna do a scene from Tolkien as if all the characters were from Minnesota. Please enjoy. So we're gonna set up the scene here. Somewhere in southern Beleriand. The War of Wrath has taken its course. The great evil of Morgoth is overthrown. Eonwë, chief among the Maiar and herald of Manwë, is weary from the long battle. He sits down on a rock, laying down his many weapons. Oofta, my dogs sure are a-barkin'. Just then, a tall figure clad in flowing robes emerges from seemingly nowhere. He approaches Eonwë.
Oh, aye there, Eonwë, herald of Manwë.
Oh, hey there, fella. Some weather we're having here, huh?
Oh yeah, real crazy. You know what they say though, if you don't like the weather in Beleriand, just wait 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if there is much of a Beleriand anymore, you know? The two look to the horizon. There are tornadoes and mountains crumbling, lightning striking repeatedly, and water flowing in from the sea.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Say, Eonwë, do you by chance remember me?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're Myron. You got yourself a new corporeal form there, I see. That's different.
You know, I've been thinking, I'm not so sure I want to do this evil thing anymore.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I used to be Myron the Admirable, you know? Now I don't even know what I am, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you've done some stuff that's not so nice, you know? It's just a darn crying shame that you followed Melkor, you know? We all miss you a whole lot. Aule, for sure, misses you a whole lot. Real bad.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, real bad. Sauron looks down at the ground sadly.
You know, I'm real sorry for all the not so nice things that I did. Oh geez, I just wish I could take it all back, you know? I've been real darn bad. You think maybe I could be good again?
Yeah, you know, I really think you could if you wanna. Yeah, for sure.
Do you think that the Valar could maybe, you know, find their way to forgive me, you think?
Oh, you know, that's a tater tot and a whole different hot dish. I think you have to, you know, come back to Valinor and, you know, be judged.
Oh yeah? Yeah, I'm just not too keen on going back there after all I done, you know? Kind of leery.
Oh, yeah. I see where you're coming from there. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, you know. Geez, I really wish you could come back with us, you know. Just come on back and we'll go right over to the Ring of Doom and sort all this out. What do you say there?
Yeah, oh jeez. Yeah, you know, I don't think I can do that. Thanks for talking to me, though, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I hope you change your mind and maybe, you know, come on back.
Oh, yeah, I'll think about it, maybe. You have yourself a good day there.
Oh, yeah, you too, huh? And that was it, guys. Minnesota Tolkien radio drama, episode 1.
Episode 1. Hope you enjoyed it.
Hope you enjoyed it. That was a fun little segment.
We've had a lot of trouble trying to get back out of the super obnoxiously heavy.
Oh, it's fucked up, man. I've been writing these for like 2 weeks now, and like I literally my inner monologue sounds like that now. And like, you know, we come from wow, shit, we didn't talk about that. We should have prefaced the reason that we're doing this to the Minnesota thing is because this podcast comes from St. Paul, Minnesota, and we're proud of it. And we realized that when we're recording this, that our accents are kind of fucked up. So we thought we'd have some fun with that.
I mean, I don't think they're fucked up.
What? You don't think they're fucked up?
No, I mean, I think they're...
Oh, no?
This is what normal people sound like.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Everybody else is weird.
Yeah, I think everyone else is just real weird, you know?
So at this point in the second age...
We're not going to talk like that. I promise. We're going to try. We're going to try to not talk that way.
I can't promise it's not going to slip now and then, especially after we've been doing all the Minnesota theater.
Right. Well, especially like people who may or may not have been to Minnesota or known anybody. Everybody in Minnesota knows somebody that fucking sounds like that.
Just like that. People in
just
your
like
family
that.
sound just like
yeah,
that.
Yeah, people in your family sound like that. And, like, you just listen to them talking, you're just like, oh, my God, can they hear themselves? Yeah, and you probably, if you're not from Minnesota, you probably think the same fucking thing about us right now.
Yeah, as we're the ones saying it. All right, so back on the subject of Sauron. So we've wrapped up the first stage, and so he isn't seen much after the events of the first stage and our lovely little...
Our little radio drama.
Our little radio drama there. He isn't seen for 500 years, and that is until he establishes himself in Mordor for the first time and announces himself there, and he starts building Barad-dûr in the year 1000. That's 1,000 years into the Second Age.
Yeah, and so at this point, when Barad-dûr is first built, he uses this opportunity to create a massive army of just real friggin' crazy creatures. A lot of orcs, trolls. He corrupts the hearts of men from the south and men from the east, known as Easterlings and Southrons, respectively. Yeah, and he uses their the thing about Sauron is he usually uses the lust for power to gain power. So, like, he corrupts the hearts of men by saying, oh, yeah, we're going to give you all these great, you're going to be so rich, you'll start winning, and you'll win so much that you'll get tired of winning. God damn, that sounds familiar. I can't imagine where that's coming from. Anyway, moving on.
So, Sauron, the way that he gets his power is through other people seeking their power, and then he just sort of achieves his power through them. We saw this when he initially teamed up with Melkor, who was obviously looking for his own power, so he just kind of hitched a ride on that bandwagon for a while. And now, after Melkor's gone, he's just looking for other people that are looking for power. So that's how he manipulates some of the men from the east and the south. Sorry,
go ahead.
Now, in the Second Age, about 1500 is when he first starts to dabble with his fair form.
Right, and this is when he starts his masterminding the whole Rings of Power scheme.
It goes all the way back into the Second Age, the Rings of Power.
Right, and so he takes the fair form and calls himself Anatar, and hangs out with the elves in Eregion and teaches them all kinds of cool smithing tricks, teaches them a little bit of sorcery, because, again, a lot of these are Noldor, and they're super, super into learning how to do cool stuff. So pretty much anybody who's teaching them how to do cool stuff, the Noldor are going to be friends with, and that leads to their downfall a couple times.
So at this point, while he's doing this, he befriends Celebrimbor, who is an elf that is a particularly good smith. He's of the line of Feanor.
He's the son of Curufin, which is one of the 7 sons of Feanor. Curufin was most into smithing of the sons of Feanor, and Celebrimbor being his son, obviously. So he's probably realistically the 3rd best smith of all time, probably.
And he gets him in on this ring scheme. So the way that it works is Sauron knows that the elves are going to be hard for him to eventually influence and overtake. So that's why he really wants this ring scheme to work. And he starts off by creating the 3 rings for the elves themselves.
The 3 elven rings. And, so these 3 elven rings were given to... One was given to Galadriel, who is the daughter of Finarfin, sister to Finrod Felagund. And so she's given one of the rings. Gil-galad is given the other ring, who is the High King of the Noldor at the time. And then the third one, who's the third one, Joel? Do you remember who it is?
You know, if I remember correctly,
starts with a C.
It's just this guy. He's been around for a while. It's always on the tip of my tongue. He's always got a hand in everything.
Fucking Círdan the Shipwright. That's who it is.
Círdan has a ring of power. Actually, at one point,
he has 2 at one point.
He is the only ring bearer. Side note, he's the only ring bearer to ever bear 2 rings at once.
At the same time, because he gives it to Gandalf, because Gandalf shows up in Middle-earth as a part of a secret mission, essentially. And he's Maiar, and he's looking to bring down Sauron. And Círdan says, hey, you might need this. Gives it to Gandalf, and it's the ring that inspires people to resist tyranny and evil. So that's real handy when Gandalf uses it.
So at this point, we thought it would be an appropriate time to give you guys the poem of the creation of the rings, because it kind of explains all this in a nutshell very effectively and beautifully.
Which is what a lot of Tolkien's poems do. Like, they're so efficient at getting information out.
They're not only beautiful, but they are efficient.
Yeah, they're great. So here we go.
3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
Right, so as you heard from the poem, he's basically using the 1 ring to essentially enslave all the other rings. Even though they give you power, which is, remember the lure, they give you power. Mm-hmm. Take them. They're
Seeks
super
power
cool.
through those looking for power.
Yeah. And, so that's essentially, he wants to enslave all the rings. And so what happens is he immediately, when he puts on the ring, the 1 ring, the elves immediately know what's up.
They can feel it.
Immediately. They can feel it. They're like, oh, shit. Take them off. And they take them off, and they hide them.
And Sauron is furious. Obviously, he banked a lot on this whole ring scheme. He put a lot of his own power into these rings and to make all this happen.
Yeah, like a lot of his power, which we'll get to later.
And the fact that it was instantly kind of debunked and the elves instantly saw his malice. They saw through it. And
he was not happy.
Rings. He wasn't happy. This is essentially what starts the War of the Rings. So, as you can tell from the poem, he's using the ring as a way to gain power through these other people he's given the rings to. Kind of like the theme we talked about. He's gaining power through others seeking power.
Yeah, take these rings. They're super cool. They got all kinds of magic powers.
But they've also got a little back door, so he can get in and control everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, this goes awry the second he puts on his 1 ring.
Mm-hmm.
The elves instantly sense his betrayal and they take the rings
take them off,
and they hide
them.
And he is furious.
So yeah, and then so the 3 rings, and then there's 7 to the dwarf lords. Let's learn a little bit about dwarfs from Joel, because he's kind of.
I thought this was worth noting. Okay, it was.
No, I know it's totally worth noting, Joel. I just think it's funny whenever we're writing these episodes. There's always explicit dwarf material.
I love the dwarves. They're one of the 3 main races that always gets shafted all the time.
No, I agree.
Just because they're not one of the children of Iluvatar. Just because they're the adopted children of Iluvatar.
See, yeah, I think it's cute. I don't dislike I don't dislike the dwarves or anything. I just think Joel's hard on for the dwarves is pretty funny.
I don't know. You might gain
let's hear about the dwarves.
You might gain a little respect after this next point. So, obviously, this Rings of Power scheme was a big deal. I mean, it did affect the elves. They just knew about it, so they took it off. And it really affected the men. As you can tell, they all turned into the Nazgul.
Right,
but
totally enslaved
the dwarves, it had almost no effect on at all. The only thing that happened to the dwarves is they did develop a particular lust for gold, more so than before, and it turned into a problem for them. It was not good. It turned into like a sickness. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it didn't do anything else to them. It didn't hurt their age. It didn't take them to the darkness.
And he wasn't controlling them the way he liked. So like at that point he was like,
it wasn't controlling them at all.
Yeah, at all. And he was like, at that point he's like, give them back. So he because Sauron's a little bitch, he tries to get back the rings that he eventually gets 3 of them back, I think.
He gets some of them back. Some of them he never gets back. Some of them are actually destroyed, and some of them are just gone. But he ultimately does not get all of the rings back. But he knows for a fact that they're gone if he doesn't get it.
So yeah, at this point, the elves have taken off the rings and they've hidden them, and that really, really pissed Sauron off. So he unleashes his armies, pretty much lays siege to all the elven kingdoms in Middle-earth. He's knocking on Rivendell's door, essentially. And
it starts a major war between the elves and Sauron. So at this point, things are going pretty far south, and then we see some characters intervene from Numenor. So at this point in the Second Age, Numenor has already been established and has been pretty prosperous at this point. Numenor being an island of men, advanced men, that came about after the First Age. Those men that helped in the War of Wrath were gifted the island of Numenor. And the Numenorians possessed great wealth, great knowledge, and a long span of life. And they were their own kingdom at this point.
Right, and they're pretty much the coolest men ever get. Like they're huge. First of all, they're tall, they're real big, and they're real smart. And some of them live really long, which we'll talk about eventually.
So, seeing that evil is back once again in Middle-earth, the Numenorians decide to intervene. They come and they team up with the elves in Middle-earth, and they drive Sauron back. And he goes all the way back to Mordor. His armies are defeated, and he just kind of hangs out there for a while and stirs. And he rebuilds strength once again and launches a massive assault. And at this point, he's calling himself the King of Men. He's
on a power trip.
He's on a major power trip. And this, especially calling himself the King of Men, really pisses off the Numenorians.
Oh, yeah.
So they come back once again in full arms to deal with this guy, and he is absolutely no match for the Numenorian army. They come, they walk right up into Mordor without even a fight, and Sauron sees that he is by far outmanned and outnumbered, and he instantly surrenders and tries to.
There's been a change of plans. That's what Sauron says at that point. There's been a change of plans.
And at that point, at surrendering, they say they're going to take him back to Numenor's prisoner, which
and Sauron's
instantly excites him. But he's going to say, "Oh no!" But he is so happy.
Lame.
They take him back as prisoner, and he is so upset that they stopped his overall plans that he takes the time to corrupt them from within. Eventually, he goes from a prisoner to the king's most trusted advisor in Numenor. And at this point, he's taken his fair form, and he's trying to.
And he's really talking in the ears of men, because they are all essentially really jealous of the elves because they don't get to they live forever, and so he is playing on this fear of death to the point where he starts converting many of them to the worship of Morgoth. He says Morgoth will give you the power to live forever.
Which isn't true.
Which is not true. And then he also convinces them to just straight up sail to Valinor and like assault Valinor.
This is where we get what's known as the Black Numenorians. The Numenorians that Sauron converted to worship Morgoth. They even took place in human sacrifices and things of that nature. He fully corrupted these guys.
Yeah, so there's a temple. It's the only temple in the world. It's the highest point in the world too, I believe, and it's called the Melantarma, and it's devoted to Ilúvatar. It's the only place that's completely devoted to him. And that's where the white tree sits, which is a descendant of the trees of Yavanna, which we'll talk about. And it's also the forebear to the white tree of Gondor.
Mm-hmm.
And he essentially, they chop the tree down and they burn it.
And they burn people on it.
And they burn people on it.
It's pretty dark stuff. He also convinces the Numenorians to sail directly against the Valar. He convinces them to get a navy together, and they're going to go assault Valinor and try to take it over, which obviously...
And steal the gift of immortality. That's their plan.
That obviously doesn't work. As soon as their ships make it to the shores of Aman, the continent that Valinor is established on, the mountains along the shore just fall on them, and they're instantly trapped in what they're called Caves of the Forgotten.
So at this point, a small band of Numenorians who were faithful to the elves have also left. They took some of the coolest stuff they could find, the 7 seeing stones and a sapling of a tree, and they took off. And they established Gondor and Arnor later on. But at this point, the Valar are extremely mad at Numenor, and they decide to just fucking destroy it. Like, They
sink it.
They sink it.
They destroy it, and they sink Numenor back into the ocean, and Sauron is destroyed along with it, although only his physical form. He flees back to Mordor, his spiritual form, and somehow his spiritual form takes the ring with him, because he takes the ring with him.
Right.
And then he just goes back to Mordor, and he continues to build up.
Mm-hmm.
Until once again, he takes shape. So Sauron flees back to Mordor, builds his armies once again, and takes shape, and wages war on the kingdom of Gondor and Arnor, especially since he finds there Numenorians that he didn't ultimately corrupt or kill.
Yeah, he's mad about that still.
He's pretty upset. So he wages war on them, and that's where we get the last alliance. This is really leading up into the Third Age and a lot of the precursors to the Lord of the Rings stuff.
What we're talking about right here is the prologue of the Lord of the Rings, the movie. All this is in there. So basically, the War of the Last Alliance, Gilgalad and Elendil and his sons, they all march with a huge army, and they lay siege to Barad-dûr, and eventually Sauron himself has to come out and contend with them. And in the ensuing fight, Sauron kills Elendil, he kills Gilgalad, and he eventually, Isildur, the son of the king, takes the broken sword of his father and slices off the finger, which contained the One Ring. And what did that do, Joel?
Well, separating the ring from his body took enough of Sauron's power away to the point where he could no longer take physical form, and he dissipated, which more or less vanquished him for the time being. He poured so much, like we said earlier, he poured so much of his power into this ring scheme. That's how big of a deal it was for him.
Yeah.
As soon as it got cut off his hand, he couldn't even take physical shape anymore.
He couldn't even maintain his physical form anymore.
And that is when he disappears from the Second Age, and he doesn't come back around again till the Third Age.
And that's what really the event that ends the Second Age.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, hey, we're going to start a new age now.
So at this point, Isildur is the one that has the ring, and later, after the tragedy of Gladden Fields, he loses it fleeing across the river Anduin. And some years later, it's picked up by the one and only Smeagol and his friend Deagle, which takes us right into the Third Age.
Yeah, and the Third Age is the events of the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, which we're all really familiar with. So we're not going to really get into it. In that, one thing we should say, just because we have been talking about Maiar, is that they are never completely destroyed. Because so the fact that when the ring is tossed in Mount Doom at the end of the Lord of the Rings, Sauron doesn't actually die. Like, a lot of people are like, he's dead.
It dissipates his power to the point where he is essentially vanquished. He can never take form again, but he is not gone.
Mm-hmm.
Sauron still exists in the form of a spirit of malice that even hangs out in Mordor for a while after the War of the Ring is done. It hangs out as a black cloud until it is
just blown
swept away by
blown out east
by a strong wind one day. So Sauron still exists.
He's out there.
Myron is out there somewhere.
Myron, come back if you're listening. Come back.
Come back, Myron. But he just can't do anything. He's lost all of his power to create physical form, and that's essentially the last
we ever hear from Sauron.
And that is the story of Sauron.
And that's the story of Sauron. So yeah, so that's pretty much the story that we wanted to tell. The parts that Sauron is essentially more of a character, and you get to hear a little bit more.
Yeah,
cool
we hope
stuff.
we introduced you to some fun stuff. He wasn't just some evil force of malice and hate. He was actually a guy, and he even turned himself into a werewolf and fought a giant hound at one point. It was really cool.
Right. He's an interesting character, and that he is kind of standalone from next week's subject, Melkor.
Yes. Tune in next week, guys, because as we all know, Sauron is the Dark Lord, but he barely holds a hat to next week's subject.
Yeah.
I mean, Melkor is the big deal.
He's the real deal. And we're going to talk about him all up in next week.
Oh, it's going to be great.
It's going to be great. That's where we're going to leave you this week, guys. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks for nerding out with us.
Thanks for nerding out. Yeah, we want to just take a minute here to do a couple thanks. So yeah, we'd really like to thank our producer and editor, Cody Freitag. He pretty much does all our technical stuff, and he believes in us, and
he gives us hope.
He gives us hope for a better tomorrow.
He more or less got this podcast going.
Yeah, and
this was more or less his idea. He's
the mastermind, and he also is on a great podcast called Gamer Radio.
Check him out.
They're
friends of ours.
Yeah, rate on iTunes and listen on SoundCloud. They're really cool. They talk about pretty much everything video games. So if you're a video game nerd or you know a video game nerd, definitely send them their way. And we also...
all of us nerds have to band together.
Right. Always band together. And speaking of banding together, we may do a crossover episode soon between video games and Tolkien, because there are Tolkien video games.
Talking War in the North,
Shadow
of Mordor, Shadow of War. Then there's the old school Lord of the Rings trilogy games for like PS2.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about it all, guys. And it's going to be in a future episode. All right, guys. Thanks again for listening. This has been episode 4. We love you for listening, and keep on Tolkien.
Keep on Tolkien, guys.